heard so much about was one that set and spun and created a lot of rain. You've said that this will be more of a wind event than the last one was. Explain.
Yeah, a couple things here. So it's going to be a wind event for sure. But at the same time, you still have this heavy rain. But there's something else I'm really worried about here when you look at this storm. This is a very vulnerable part of the Gulf of Mexico when it comes to the storm surge. And if you look at the shape of the coast, you get these little areas that are shaped like that. The water just gets trapped and it can't go anywhere. So the water piles up. And the other part is right along the coast is very shallow. So what happens is that water piles up really quick. 8 to 12 feet of inundation is just absolutely staggering and not survivable. So that's why we're really telling people the window is shrinking to be prepared. That's a lot of water, but look how far away, even down the Tampa area, 2 to 4. And one misconception that we have to talk about, people are saying, well, I'm on the left side, it's not going to be an issue. Well, we build that in. So if you have a little shift in that track, little wiggles matter. Small shifts in that track can make a big difference on the ground, several feet, if not more. I've seen cases where 30 miles can make the difference between 2 foot of water and 9.
Ken Graham at the National Hurricane Center. Thanks so much. We'll keep in close touch. The Bay County head of emergency preparedness saying just a little while ago, if you're in an emergency evacuation zone, and a mandatory one, now is the time to go. That's what they're asking at the local level. More now on our other top story of the day, the United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley leaving her job at year's end. It was a shock in Washington by almost all accounts. In fact, when the news broke this morning, lawmakers told our senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram that they had no idea at all that this might be coming. Our State Department correspondent Rich Edson is live with the news. Rich, this was a bit of a surprise there as well.
Yeah, it was, Shep, and officials are telling us that she told much of her staff this morning that she was resigning and then went to the White House to meet with the president. Also at the White House later today was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He wished her well. He thanked her for their service. They worked together on a number of issues, especially on North Korea. The center of foreign policy on North Korea really is at the UN Security Council, where the countries have gotten together to apply those sanctions against the Kim Jong-un regime. It's where Pompeo and Haley most recently called out China and Russia for easing up on their sanctions enforcement. She had a better relationship with Secretary Pompeo than she did with the previous Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. When this administration had started, she often got out in front, was making foreign policy speeches on issues that the then Secretary of State hadn't yet spoken about, leading to questions as to whether they were coordinating on certain foreign policy issues. And at a time, at the beginning of the administration, when foreign diplomats were asking what exactly Trump foreign policy meant for them, Shep.
Hey, world leaders, they're responding as well, Rich.
Yeah, they are. There's been plenty of praise, even from countries that there's been disagreements with, and that's been the case for Nikki Haley at the United Nations. Some instances is particular when you look at the relationship with the European allies. The Europeans not a big fan of the U.S. withdrawing from the Iran nuclear agreement, though the U.S. and Europeans have worked in other areas. The U.K.'s ambassador to the United Nations, Karen Pierce, writes, quote, she led it on several UN important issues, including North Korea and responding to chemical weapons use in Syria and Salisbury. I look forward to working closely with her until the end of her term. She calls her an outstanding ambassador and a great colleague. Also during her time, U.S. foreign policy was decidedly pro-Israel. We've gotten some response from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who writes, quote, I would like to thank Ambassador Nikki Haley, who led the uncompromising struggle against hypocrisy at the UN, and on behalf of the truth and justice of our country, best of luck. Now, Haley and the administration were also at odds with the United Nations itself, withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council, also withholding aid from a Palestinian UN aid organization, claiming that they were that the money was not being well spent. Shep?
Rich Edson at State, thanks. Nikki Haley's resignation comes exactly 4 weeks to the day before the midterm elections. And President Trump is set to leave at any moment now for a rally in Iowa, where he'll try to boost support for Republican candidates. Let's turn to Tamara Keith, White House correspondent for NPR. Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
What's the goal out there?
Well, the goal with all of he has 4 rallies this week. The speed or the number of his rallies has really increased in the last couple of weeks, and he seems to be really about getting the base fired up. I was at his rally in Kansas on Saturday, and as much as he was celebrating the Kavanaugh confirmation, which had just happened, he quickly made a turn to make it about sort of being against the Democrats and saying you have all these things you like, Democrats would take it away. You know, the phrasing "angry mob" or "you don't give arsonists matches." Some of the phrases that you can expect to hear probably again because they got so much applause at the last rally.
You note that he had been traveling to largely red states, base areas, and that now he's moving to more toss-up areas.
Right, still red states, but in races that the Cook Political Report rates as either toss-up or lean Republican, but these are more competitive House races, areas where there was, for a time, it was thought maybe the president wouldn't go to these races that are being sort of fought in swing suburbs, that he would stick to Senate races or really going to the red states where he dominated in 2016. Now he's going to areas where he's not necessarily as overwhelmingly popular, but he is still very popular with Republican voters. And it seems to be a calculation that winning the base is key to winning the midterms or not being overtaken by the wave in the midterms.
Tamara, this move on Nikki Haley's part today, that it was such a surprise in Washington, a surprise within, there's obviously stuff we don't know about everything. There's something we don't know here about this timing.
Right. Well, and the letter, as has been noted, was dated 6 days ago. And that this was a secret that was kept is pretty remarkable, given the way secrets are typically not well kept in particular in this administration. What I think is truly notable about her departure is, as this video is showing, here she is in the Oval Office sitting next to the president. They're both saying nice things about each other. Instead of sort of the typical way that people leave the administration, which is often in a tweeted announcement that they may or may not know about in advance. This is a very different departure, one where she's giving 3 months notice.
Yep, we'll know when we know. Tamara
Yeah.
Keith from NPR, national correspondent. Thanks so much, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We've just gotten news. The president is speaking right now, and he's taking questions on the South Lawn. This is not something that was scheduled. It's one of those, he's about to take a trip, and all of a sudden he started taking questions on the South Lawn. We can imagine what the questions are. What the answers are, I don't yet know, but I am told in just a moment they'll be turning tape around of this, and we'll hear exactly what the president had to say and exactly what questions he was receiving. I know we have enough time for a quick commercial break, so we'll have that for you right after this. The president on these matters, but here's what I know. He talked about the United Nations and Nikki Haley. He talked about his daughter, Ivanka Trump, and how she would be, quote, dynamite at the United Nations, but that he can't be accused of nepotism. It's my understanding that they either are still talking or have just finished talking, asking questions, answering questions, and right after that's finished, the White House pool will play that video out, and we'll send it right to you directly the moment it comes in. First, though, more and more schools in the United States are moving to a 4-day school week. The Wall Street Journal reports there are around 600 schools on that schedule, up from around 120 just a decade ago. Fox News Channel, its parent company, and the Wall Street Journal's parent company share common ownership. Some school officials say that the shorter weeks have saved them money and improved teacher morale. But some parents say they're against the change for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which because they need to find extra child care. Susan Lee is here from the Fox Business Network. That's a whole extra day you got to pay for.
That's right. But a 4-day school week. Yeah, so that's taking place mostly in these rural school communities. Western states, for instance, in Colorado, 55% of school districts are on these altered schedules. In New Mexico, it's 40%. And so when you have a shorter week, you also have a longer day. On average, about 30 to 90 minutes longer. But there are studies that show there are benefits to a shorter school week. For instance, better teacher retention, less burnout, more time for class prep and to grade papers, also higher student attendance, less absenteeism, higher aptitude, and also for the cash-strapped school districts, cost reductions in utilities and transportations, also substitute teacher fees as well. But you talked about the burden of extra child care with that extra day off. Now, what they found in these rural communities is that usually you have a parent at home a family member, a grandparent. So there isn't that big of a burden, that big of a need for childcare, but that also limits the adoption of 4-day school week in bigger metropolis urban centers, right? Because they're usually expensive. Both parents usually work. There's also more trouble for older kids to get into.
So some other changes that I'm hearing about for both students and the systems.
Yeah, so they're trying to basically make it better for students to go to school. They want to go to school, and that means later start times as well. We know that from a health and physicality perspective,